So pulling that thread of feelings and reacting to this painting, I'm curious how you're feeling about talking about birth control in front of other people in a public place. How does that feel?
Excellent.
I love it. It's okay if excellent's not your answer. Other feelings that folks are having. Again, no wrong answers.
Shouldn't be a problem.
Shouldn't be a problem. That word shouldn't is an interesting choice.
It's not my problem, but it shouldn't be a problem.
But it shouldn't be a problem. I love that. Shocking. Other feelings about discussing birth control. Okay. I like to hold space for that and just acknowledge that some people are super comfortable talking about contraception and some people aren't. Like maybe this is the first time you're going to talk about birth control with other people. And so that spectrum of feelings is okay. I think a big part of our work is to normalize the conversation, right? And so I always use the example of sunscreen. If we were going to the beach, I would ask you if you brought your sunscreen and if you put your sunscreen on. And I think our work is to work towards a world where we can ask our friends and our loved ones about their birth control methods, right? Same deal. So that's part of what I hope we're doing through our work at A Step Ahead. So you said it shouldn't be a problem. Why do you think it's challenging for some people to have these conversations?
Not everybody agrees.
Not everybody agrees.
So it becomes taboo.
Other challenges.
Lack of education.
Lack of education. So like you don't feel like you know enough to talk about it.
I'm wondering, is it regional? Because I come from an area where, you use sunscreen and wrap it.
I love it. Where are you from?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. So yeah, a regional cultural element maybe of like it's something in our community that we don't talk about. Other challenges you think that make it hard for people to have these conversations? Religion. So religion that's focused on abstinence or?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, it can be challenging, and I think for a lot of the reasons that you guys talked about. Where did you learn about reproductive health? School.
But from your teachers or from your peers?
Teachers, how good. I grew up
From
with
teachers.
Yeah.
What about others? Where have you learned about reproductive health? Internet. Others? Mom. Yeah. My team, feel free to chime in with your answers too. A range of topics. So one thing that a lot of people in our area are not aware of, here in Tennessee, there's something called the Gateway Law. It was passed in 2012. And what it says is that you cannot talk about anything in public schools that could be perceived as a gateway to sexual activity. And it's an abstinence-focused family life education, right? So this generational divide, not to name age, of my teacher versus the internet is something we see all the time. And youth today are getting less education in schools than you got, than I got. And I don't think that a lot of people know that. And what is happening is they're learning about it on the internet where there's a lot of misinformation, right? So that's something that we like to draw attention to, and we'll talk about our educational programming in a little bit, but it's interesting to hear what trusted sources people have to seek this information. Is it mom? Is it a friend? So yeah, the internet and peers are a lot of what we hear from the youth that we serve, that's how they're learning about sex and contraception. So yeah. So I'm curious what impact you think contraceptive access or reproductive health education can have on someone's life. What happens when they have those things? Control. Money. Choice. Other things? What's the feeling when you have the knowledge and the resources you need? What does that feel like? Freedom. Powerful. Liberating. Yeah. What does it feel like when you don't have those things? When you feel unsure or when you need something and you can't get it? What does that feel like? Vulnerable. Yeah. Desperate. Yeah. Apart from the gateway law that I just told you about, you can't use that as your answer. What barriers do you think people face in accessing birth control?
Transportation.
Say more. What does that look like?
If you don't know where the clinic is, and if you don't have a car, many times bus lines don't work.
Yeah.
For people, to get from whether that be home or school or whatever that is.
Yeah. Other barriers?
Money or proper insurance.
Insurance. So insurance can be really confusing, right? And if something gets denied, it's not always clear like how you appeal that and how you communicate with your insurance company. And then if you call them, are you going to be on hold with a robot for 30 minutes? So private insurance can be really tricky to navigate.
Misconceptions or like misunderstandings about birth control.
Say more.
So I, being a young female, have experienced like a lot of my friends and like a lot of people are like, oh, well, birth control is going to cause this, and like not knowing what other options that there are. Everybody kind of thinks it's like one pill and you're going to have a horrible experience, but not realizing that it's different for every person and there's
Yeah.
different options.
Do we think that's tied to the internet being our source of information? Right? And a lot of times we're going on social media and sharing our negative experience with something, right? And then that gets traction and takes off and people share it a million times. And for every one user that's maybe having that rare, weird side effect, there are, thousands who had a great experience who aren't posting about it, right? So that misinformation, social media thread can also be a barrier. Yeah. What other barriers do you think people face? Embarrassment. So say more. Embarrassment to talk to their provider. Embarrassment. What does that look like?
Speaking from experience.
Yes. Share, please, if you're comfortable.
My young son, even though we put condoms in his Easter basket,
I love it.
did say, Mom, I'm out. Will you go get me some? I go, dude, go get yourself. Because you can buy it over the counter.
Yeah.
And he was too embarrassed to go buy himself.
Yeah.
So, when we decide to be embarrassed to go purchase things, okay, I'll cover it for you this time.
Yeah. Embarrassment. Yeah. It's a great example.
Here, I'd like to pop off that, like, depending on what, like, culture and, like, family you grow up in, like, that can also be tied to shame. So,
Yeah.
I feel like shame's a very powerful barrier with like, a lot of things, especially
Yeah.
with, like, birth control and all those
Yeah.
things.
That's significant. Yeah. Other barriers you think people face?
I was just going to say lack of insurance.
Lack of insurance. That's right. Or underinsurance is a really common insurance that doesn't cover anything, or that's a really high deductible, or is difficult to navigate. So yeah, uninsured for sure.
Just lack of clinics. There's lack of places that you can go. Where do you go to get it?
Right.
Is it in your neighborhood or is it somebody else's?
Right. So that was a lack of medical providers, if you couldn't hear that answer. Yeah. And do I have to drive an hour away to get the birth control method I want? That lack of healthcare providers. So we cover an 18-county region, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. We have 11 counties in Tennessee that we cover, and of those, 6 are maternity care deserts, which means there's no OBGYN, there's no birth center, there's no women's reproductive health care, period. 6 of 11 counties. So this provider issue is a big deal, and especially post-COVID, right? As we see lots of medical professionals leaving the field. So that's a very real barrier that we see all the time. Others? Time. Say more.
If you already have a child or are a single parent working a full-time job, clinics are only open Monday through the same time most people are working. So kind of similar to the transportation barrier, just lack of time to be taking care of yourself.
Right. Some clinics still, we've seen, not our partners, but others I've seen. So there was in COVID, there was a moment where you couldn't bring anyone with you to your appointment, including children, right? And so now you're funding childcare, and you're taking off work, and you're driving an hour, and you're waiting for an hour. And then you might have to come back because they're not ready with the method that you have. That's a huge time commitment. Yeah. Others? Other barriers?
A minor and don't have
Yeah.
a mom like you, how are you gonna?
Parental support. Right, in this 9 to 5, if I'm a high school senior and I have to get to the clinic Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, when am I going? And how am I gonna get there? How am I gonna pay for it? So let's talk about cost. How much do you think birth control costs? Too much. Any guesses? If you're paying out of pocket, how much do you think an IUD costs?
$750 for my 3 girls.
Yeah, does that surprise people?
Yeah.
What did she say?
$750 for an IUD. The most expensive method we cover is the arm implant. It's called an Nexplanon, and it costs anywhere from $900 to $1,200 just for the device. That's not the clinic visit, the insertion fee, the necessary testing. It's not follow-up care, it's not removal. That is just the piece of plastic that's going in your arm, $1,200. Right? That's a big, if you have to pay out of pocket, that's huge. Cost is a really significant barrier, right? Yeah.
How much are vasectomies, reversible?
That's a great question. I don't know out of pocket. Vasectomies are not something we cover.
Vasectomy, reversible when you're reasonable.
So that leads, I'm going to actually jump questions because you bring up a really good point. So part of the reason that I chose this piece is that it's called boy-girl, and we have a really prominent male figure. And when we talk about reproductive health and birth control, we often talk about women. So what do you think the role men should play in contraceptive access or reproductive health education? Equal, what does that look like? If it were equal, what would that look like? If you have a vision for that.
Well, you could help pay, you could transport, you could help with the decision making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other thoughts about male participation?
Well, aren't they kind of primary?
It's a good point. Without men involved, we wouldn't be having this conversation, maybe.
I think it's important for men to understand how it works, how the menstrual cycle works, and just be as educated as they can be about women's bodies
Yeah.
and how things work.
Other thoughts about men and boys and their involvement in contraceptive access?
So from an education standpoint, what we hear so many times too is it's always the mother or the grandmother who talks to the kids. It's never the father or the grandfather. And it always falls on the mother and the grandmother to provide that education. So even just that educational piece, if you have a male in your home that's comfortable talking to the male or female in your home, makes a huge difference for the kids to feel like that they're more empowered to make good decisions. But 90% of the time, those conversations happen with the female and not the male.
Why do we think that is? I'm curious.
I feel like people just assume that it's the woman's job because
Why?
in our traditional society, it's the women who are supposed to care for the children. They're the home, the home providers and stuff, so they're supposed to be the one to teach it.
Other thoughts about that? Moms being the primary educators in their home?
I do want to say, to piggyback on that, men should have the education as well. I was just told a story yesterday about somebody who, family friend, it was a single dad, had to call his daughter's friend's mother to come have this talk because she's having her period, and he was like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so you have,
Yeah?
what do you do when the mother's not present?
Right. Yeah.
The men lack confidence because they weren't taught, and it's a cycle. So
Or this conversation about like shame, right? Of maybe if I do know, am I comfortable talking about it? I think the other thing that occurred to me as y'all were talking is this thread of parents, grandparents, caregivers who received education at school. Do we think there's an assumption that their kids are getting that education at school, right? So it may not be like an active, I don't want to have the conversation. It may be an assumption that their child is getting that education elsewhere. And that's a scary assumption, but I think it's a common one that we see as well in our work. Yeah. So Adira shared a little bit about David Park, the artist, history and in the community and being an advocate for something that he was not personally impacted by. So I say all the time, I've never sat in my doctor's office and wondered if I was going to be able to pay for birth control. That's never been my lived experience. How do we advocate for something that we are not directly impacted by? What does that look like? Listen to other experiences, yeah. Somebody's gonna, yeah. Be open to hearing experiences that are unlike your own, yeah. Other thoughts?
Going into it knowing that you haven't had that experience, therefore you carry bias, and being open to, like you're saying, open to it, but I think always remembering that you have a bias going into it because you didn't experience it and you don't live that life. So that openness being, I have this bias, whether I know I have this bias or not, I have a bias here. Let's put this aside and hear their conversation or hear their life story.
Yeah.
Yeah, like surrounding yourself around people who are different from you, and like that way you have that space to have those conversations. So if you're around this, like the same people who have the same experiences, you're never gonna have that conversation.
Right, yeah. Other thoughts?
Just bringing awareness in general, because like
Yeah.
you have these conversations and you don't even know. There's organizations like your organization,
Right.
like what can you do to help people that do your work?
That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. I think raising awareness about organizations doing the work, supporting organizations doing the work on the topic, but also raising awareness about the issues, right? Almost everybody looked shocked when I said $1,200, right? So you didn't know it was that much. That means the general public doesn't know it's that much, right? And so having conversations about, did you know that birth control was this expensive, right? And raising people's understanding of the barriers can also be really, really important. Yeah. Other ways to sort of get active and get involved, even if it doesn't impact you.
Volunteer with organizations that will support those.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. All right, well, you ran through my questions like this, but I want to hear what questions or thoughts you have about contraception and reproductive health education. You get to pick my brain now. I've picked your brain for a little bit. And then after that, we'll kind of share about our programming and what we do at A Step Ahead.
I would say this is actually kind of refreshing for me to hear this conversation because the area where I grew up in Tennessee, I don't think there's any like contraceptive clinics nearby at all. I live in like a very rural part of West Tennessee.
Okay.
So like this kind of conversation is something I've never heard before, like
Yeah,
anywhere.
that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. Other reactions, questions, thoughts?
I'm so curious, Mandy, I think I've read, but the statistics of the abstinence only in schools.
Yes.
And the amount of unwanted pregnancies.
Yes.
Aren't they correlated?
They are. They are. So here in Tennessee, what's interesting, so remember I shared that we're an abstinence-only family life curriculum. If a county's teen pregnancy rate jumps above a certain rate, so it's 19.5 per thousand, then they have to do comprehensive sex education because they know that when they do comprehensive sex ed, that teen pregnancy rate will come down.
So what grade do they do that comprehensive?
Never. Never. Yeah, so it would be high school. And here in Tennessee, it's also, it depends on the county. So in Hamilton County, the family life curriculum is an opt-in program. Your parent actually has to sign a form or call your school and say, yes, I want my child to have the family life reproductive health. So there's an extra hoop that folks have to jump through. In other counties, it's an opt-out, so it kind of varies. But it would be high school. Yeah, yeah.
I think it's usually 9th and 11th.
Yeah, it's like 9th and 11th. They hit you twice, yeah.
So they do part of it in 9th grade and they do like a refresher in 11th.
Yeah.
If they do it all.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. Other questions?
So is there a way, there's a cultural divide?
Yes.
And so oftentimes you're probably preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
So how do you bridge that cultural divide and talk to parents who may totally disagree with you? How do you start those dialogues?
Yeah.
And meet in a sort of, at least start the dialogue? It
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be agreeing with you, but
Right.
at least, how do you do that? How do you bridge the cultural divide?
Yeah, so this is like Mandy Cowley's personal perspective on advocacy work, and it's how I approach our work at A Step Ahead, is meeting people where they are. So if we think of knowledge on a scale of 1 to 10, and 1 is like, I can't say birth control out loud because I'm so ashamed and scared, and 10 is like, I'm a gynecologist and I'm happy to talk about birth control all the time, right? If I go into a conversation with someone who's a 3, but I treat them like a 7, they're not going to hear anything I'm saying because I'm not meeting them where they are. So for us, a lot of the time that we're adapting our conversations, it's gauging where that person is and where their comfort level is and what they are okay talking about and moving them. In one conversation, I'm not going to move them to a 7. I might move them to a 3.5. I might move them to a 4. And then moving them along that knowledge scale and that comfort scale. And recognizing, right, that people have their own lived experiences and biases and personal traumas sometimes around these topics because they are very personal. So honoring that while also trying to move them along. That's how I approach our work. It's like, where are you now? And can I get you just a hair over by the end of our conversation? Yeah. Do you have thoughts on how you move the meter? I'm happy to hear them.
No, I don't. Well, I don't really, but I think it's partly going into areas where, because part of that is you still have to figure out a way to open
Yeah.
the doors. So that's part of
Yeah.
That's part of it. And I think you're right. I think what you said is sort of a great way to do it. I think a lot of it is, there's a whole political side. So
Yeah.
there's a voting side.
Right.
You said voting is a very good way to advocate, but
Yes.
also to talk to the people who are totally opposed to you,
Right.
to try to sort of at least begin that connection,
Yeah.
begin to move them, even
That's
if
right.
what I think you said is a great way to approach it.
And if you are opposed, I think a lot of what gets me curious is why, right? And if we can pull the thread of why, I might can help change your perspective a little bit. Maybe it's a bad faith assumption about what we do. Maybe it's a misunderstanding about what birth control access looks like, or a misunderstanding that what we love about talking about comprehensive sex education, often folks who oppose that assume that if you teach kids comprehensive sex ed, that they're going to start having a lot of sex, right? But the data is actually reverse. When youth have access to comprehensive sex ed, they actually delay sexual activity because they understand where their boundaries are. They understand what consent is. They understand how to advocate for themselves. And so some of it, so if you oppose my comprehensive sex ed, if I understand why that is, then maybe I can dispel it a little bit. And maybe facts and data aren't going to speak to you, but I can help kind of make a question mark in your mind, maybe, that the more you see it, you pull the thread a little bit, right?
Henry mentioned voting.
Yes.
As we learned from experience in Hamilton County, some of the most ignorant people about basic reproductive cycles are our legislatures. And so they're the ones that are making the rules in these laws, and they know nothing about a woman's reproductive cycle.
Yeah.
So maybe we should aim some education at the people that are actually making these
Right.
laws.
Yeah. Or talking with people in those positions about why it's important to you, right? Why is contraceptive access important to you as their constituent? That really is important. I'll tell you about a bill that was moving through the Tennessee legislature this past session. The entire content of the bill said hormonal birth control pills, IUDs, and emergency contraception are not subject to Tennessee's abortion ban. Essentially saying birth control is not abortion, and that bill failed in committee. So it never got voted on by the Tennessee legislature. So that's sort of where some folks in positions of power are sitting, right? And so, yeah, voting and advocating with the folks who are in positions of power is really important, and providing education for them. Sometimes my health educators say like, well, we're in the field doing health education. And I say, yeah, well, every legislator and supporter I meet with, I'm also doing health education, because so few of us understand how our bodies work or how contraception works. So it's a huge part of the conversations that we have when we meet with those folks. Other questions, comments, reactions? It's been a good conversation so far.
I would say from an education standpoint, when we talk to parents about talking to their kids, we've really taken a step back and said, before we're going to talk to them about comprehensive sex education, we're going to talk to them about relationships, we're going to talk to them about communication styles, we're going to talk to them about making good decisions. And when you say to a parent or a grandparent or guardian, I want to help your kid make good decisions, that's a different conversation than saying, I want to help your kid pick the right birth control. So we're helping them make a good decision about the relationships they're in, whether it's their familiar relationships, their spouses, their girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever that relationship is. We want them to make good decisions in all those relationships that lead to good decisions later. So that for a parent to hear, and I had a grandparent say to me, like, why should I let you talk to my kid about birth control? That's my job. And I said, well, what do you do for a living? He said, I'm an engineer. And I said, so I would never tell my daughter how to build a bridge because I don't know how to build a bridge.
Right.
But I can tell her, I talked about health education because I have a master's in public health. And he went, okay. Like, I get that. That makes sense. So a lot of it is just finding that level ground. Like, what is it that you're good at? And you can talk to my child about that, and I'll talk to your child about what I'm good at. So it is this kind of leveling the playing ground with them. But saying, I'm not going to run into the room with a box of condoms and start passing them out. I'm going to ask them first, where are we in this room? Who are we talking to? Where are we starting? Are we starting with boundaries and consent? And like, do I have to ask before I put my hands on you? Yes, I do. Like, we're starting there sometimes, especially with the younger kids. So I think that has been very well received by parents and guardians, because we have a lot of grandparents and guardians that are raising children that it was so different when they raised their kids, and now they're raising another generation of kids, and they're like, I don't know how to do this because they're learning everything from the internet, and I don't even know how to get on the internet. So it's definitely different.
Yeah. And I say all the time, I have an 11-year-old, he'll be 12 in August. The world has changed so much since I was a kid. My parents sent me to a class at a hospital where some nurses taught me about experts taught me about reproductive health and sex education, and kudos to my parents for knowing, like, we can't have this conversation, but we're going to find somebody who can. But yeah, my kiddo has the world at his fingertips now, and he has peers who have the world at their fingertips. So even if I can guard what he's consuming, it doesn't mean that his peers are guarded, and they are coming with questions. You know, we got an email from the teacher this year that was like, somebody in class was talking about sleeping with someone and what that meant, and so one of his peers was already having a conversation about sex. So it's just a different world. Like, I need our resources as a parent. So I'll launch into kind of our programming, and then I'm happy to answer questions about a step ahead or just about contraception in general. So we were a nonprofit who was founded by Rachel Schulson, who happens to be here. Woo, woo, woo. We were founded in 2013, and now we serve an 18-county region. So we've been at it for about 10 years now. The bread and butter of what we do is the access to free birth control. We are not a medical provider. We're not a clinic. I didn't spend all day inserting IUDs, and nobody would want me to do that. We partner with existing medical providers throughout the region. So we have 10 clinic partners. And basically what happens is people call our appointment line. We do an intake depending on the method they want, where they are geographically, et cetera. We partner them with one of our medical providers. At the end of that call, we transfer it. They make their first appointment. They go for their visit. They get the contraceptive method that's right for them. And then we pay for everything that's not covered by other means. So if they have insurance, we pay copay deductible. If they're uninsured, we pay for everything. And when I say everything, I mean all the necessary testing, pap smear, STI testing, pregnancy testing, the method, insertion, follow-up care, removal. If they have issues and need to go back, we pay for all of that. So it's 100% free. Sometimes people question us and go like, but what do I pay for? Because nothing is free. This is a trick. It's not a trick. It's 100% free. So at our physical providers, we do the IUD and the implant, and then we have a telehealth provider who does a year's worth of birth control pills. You never have to leave your home. They get mailed directly to your house. So that's been a really cool addition, particularly for those maternity care deserts I mentioned. So when we think about somebody living in Ray County is a maternity care desert. There are no reproductive health resources. That person would have to drive to Hamilton County. So they might have to drive an hour and a half, 2 hours to get care from a reproductive health provider. Well, now I can mail birth control pills to your house and cover the cost. So that's been a really cool addition. We just launched that last summer. So it's a new addition. We're actively working on adding the ring, the patch, and the depot shot as well. So we hope within the next 6 to 12 months to have those.
Okay, so that is
Yep.
I'm menopausal, so it's been a long time since I've considered this. What's the difference then between the implant and a depot?
So the implant is a little bar that goes in your arm. It's good for 3 years. And depo's a shot. Yep. Sorry, I'm using lingo. Habits. So that's the medical free birth control part of our work. And so since we were founded, we've connected 6,800 people with access to birth control, and we've covered over $2 million in clinic expenses, 100% funded by private donations.
What's the age ranges?
So predominantly, most of our clients are in their 20s, but it goes up to people in menopause or perimenopause you still need birth control. And yeah, a lot of in their 20s. Yeah, it's kind of our predominant. Yeah.
Are you able to do people under 18?
Yes. So in all 3 states, so we cover an 18-county region, 11 counties in Tennessee, 5 in Georgia, 2 in Alabama. In all 3 states, minors have a right to access contraception without parental consent. So we refer minors to medical providers, and we let the medical provider decide if they're competent to make that decision, right? In Alabama, it's a little different. Their law is a little specific. It's 14 and up, unless you've already had a child, you've graduated high school. There's all of these conditions. So basically 14 and up in Alabama. But yes, we do refer minors. But it's a very small proportion of our work. And some of that is probably the barriers of how do I get to a provider Monday through Friday, 9 to 5? Do I have a car to get there? That kind of stuff. So that's one piece. So remember, our mission is to remove barriers to contraception through education, outreach, and access. So I told you about access. Outreach is really obvious. That's what we're doing right now, going out, talking about our work. Education, and I'll let Tina jump in as well. Tina is our program manager who oversees the education and outreach component of our work. We provide youth and adult education on a broad range of reproductive health topics. We have 4 health educators on staff. 1 is bilingual and speaks both Spanish and English. So for youth, that could be a comprehensive sex ed program that we have. It could be, as Tina's talking about, one-off things that are building trust, right? Like maybe we're having a conversation about consent that's building trust, and maybe that youth comes back to us in a few years when they are ready for contraception, right? On the adult end, we do a sex ed crash course. We interact with a ton of adults who have no idea how their bodies work. I've sat in educational sessions where at the end someone goes I didn't know that's why I had a period. Or that's how I got pregnant. Literally, people just don't understand how their bodies work if they were not taught or exposed to that, right? For caregivers, we do a why to have the talk and how to have the talk. We started with how to have the talk and realized we needed to back up a little and say why it's important to have that conversation. And like Tina said, yes, we are the experts, but also if you want to have that sacred conversation with the youth in your lives, we want to give you the tools to do that. And so we often, see ourselves in that role as well. So that's the education piece. We've educated over 8,000 people. Anything else you want to add about education? Did I miss anything?
Well, not all of this, I said in the high school.
Yeah.
They teach about, have a whole course on finances.
Nah. Yeah.
We do try to build trust. Sometimes it's with the kids, and sometimes we're trying to build trust with the parents. So we want the kids to trust us, but we want the parents to trust us. So if they're not comfortable having the conversation, then we can have the conversation.
Right.
So a lot of the trust building we do, even though it's with the kids, it's really with the parents.
Yeah.
Like, we want those parents to feel really comfortable saying, we're gonna send our kids to that comprehensive sex education course for 5 weeks, and they can ask all the questions there.
Right.
We did that one summer, and I had a kid say, Miss Tina, why do I have to come here and listen to you talk about all these things? And I said, well, you can go home and your mom can tell you. I'll come back tomorrow. My mom telling me these things. I mean, so it's not an easy conversation to have. I have 2 kids, and I talk about it all the time, and it's still not an easy conversation to have with your own kids. So it is sometimes when there's another person in the middle. So we really try to give a lot of the adult education we do. We say, we're telling you these things about your body so you know how to tell the youth in your life. When the reality is that he doesn't know what I mean, he doesn't know these things either, but it sounds better when I say, we're going to tell you this about your body so you can share it with in your life. And they're like, oh, okay. So we'll talk to any group that you have. We go to the community kitchen, we go to CADIS, we go to
We'll come to your house. You want to get a group of people together? We'll come to your house and do it.
how to have the talk. You let me know where you get people together, and we will be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and with the youth, I would say some of the common things we're seeing right now are a lot of myths and misconceptions because they are leaning on social media and the internet, and it's really hard to combat. Once they've learned something a certain way from the internet, it's hard to combat that. So Brooke is our marketing manager, and we have a great TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. You should go follow all the things. Trying to put out education that's accessible and accurate and appeals to that youth demographic. And maybe is counteracting some of those misconceptions that are out in the world. Questions about our programming or what we do? That was the elevator speech. And I say all the time, yes, I am super passionate about birth control, but what I'm more passionate about is what's possible when people have the resources they need to thrive and to live on their terms. And that's really what our work is about. Yes, it's birth control. Yes, we're the birth control people. I'm sure when people see me come in, they're like, great, the birth control lady. But it's really about so much more than that. It's about helping people thrive and determine what their futures look like. So that's why we do the work. Yes, it's about birth control, but it's about so much more. Thank you for coming and for having this conversation. I loved it. Okay, thanks.